as Victoria already mentioned, I will dwell a little bit, on the survey we did. I won't give you details about percentages. You can find those percentages when basically the results of the survey will be out. So what I wanted to give you just is a sort of a general trend of what's going on in these countries, and then I will describe a little bit more the tracker we developed. So as Victoria was saying, we did these 3 web surveys which were focused on OA policies. We wanted to know what was the state of open access in these countries, and mainly the areas where we wanted to have some information was what the research funders were doing, what research performing organizations were doing, so universities and research centers, whether they had institutional policy on open access, whether they had also institutional open access repositories, sort of guidelines and policies, and then we wanted to know what publishers were doing in all these countries. As Victoria mentioned, this survey were conducted between April and July last year, and okay, the results will be available. So I will talk about the common traits and some differences. I have to say, as Victoria mentioned to that, there are some countries like Portugal, Spain, and probably even France. France has got its own way, but these 3 countries are the ones who are far ahead. Compared to Italy, Greece, and Turkey. But I would say that the common trend is that everybody is working pretty hard and in succeeding. So we have a positive picture. I will spend some time on the publishers survey, and then I will make some comments on what we learned from this survey and which will be the next action. So I would say that in general, even if Professor Rentier states that we should have a top-down approach, and I share his view, but I think most of the countries, and this is the case of Southern Europe too, we had a bottom-up approach. Usually, the strategy which is prevailing is the green, strategies, even if we have some journals which have been converted in open access. And an open access, repository infrastructure is in place in all the countries. I think in the end, in Portugal, we have almost 90% of institutions which have institutional repositories. Probably it's about 80% in Spain, and a bit lower, in France. But even I think in Greece, which was one of the lowest, it's 40%. So, I think it's pretty high. It's interesting to see that in those countries like Spain and Portugal, where they had, a sort of an infrastructure which also centralized and gave support, like Recollecta, in Spain, and Recap in Portugal, and also, the French unique experience of having one centralized, archive. Those countries, shows, that the fact they had this approach, they succeeded more in having institutional repositories, but the growth is constant everywhere. There's been a key role, represented by libraries and librarians, and still librarians are involved, in running, the repositories. Often they're also, playing a role in depositing, material on behalf of the researchers, and they also have, this liaisoning and advocacy, activities. The point is that, the number, it was mentioned before, the number of institutional policies, and especially of institutional mandates, are very few compared to the number of institutional policies. And if they are in place, they're voluntary, so there is no enforcement and there is no even monitoring. If there are mandates, with the exception of Portugal and in some cases in Spain, as well, most of the cases, the mandates, this is the case of Italy, for example, where we have, quite a lot, we have almost 30 mandates on doctoral, theses, but we have no mandates, for research papers. Whereas, for institutional repositories policies, most of the repositories have policies, but those policies usually include a lot of information about submission, content, metadata, probably even license to publish, but they don't cover long-term preservation. So long-term preservation is something which we have to pay more attention. I think there was a seminar which was held in Portugal a few months ago, on that. So, there is an interest. And then research data. Research data is not really, it's present in some of the institutional repositories. I think in France it's the highest one, which has over 20% of the content is made of research data. But in the other countries it's about 10%, and in Italy there is no institutional repository which has, any research data. With reference, with research funding institutions, this is the more critical point. The response, was pretty low, but also because we think that most of these research funders, with few exceptions, have no policy, no voluntary policy, no mandate, policy. In some cases, they encourage open access. In others, they're not even aware of what we're talking about. So, but I think, that all the workshop you were mentioning, plus, the open air and the MedoNet in general, and also, the recommendations and Horizon 2020 are helping us, to make, those research funders more aware and probably to change their agenda and make open access more, a priority. With publishers, this is interesting, the kind of picture we have. Most of the publishers, I think in Southern Europe are basically, they represent, social sciences and humanities. We have, few scientific, publishers. So the one which replied, to the survey, in general, friendly towards open access. This is less the case in France. It's definitely less the case in Italy, where we had a very low response. And the three which responded were in favor, of open access. In some countries, except, I think Portugal, they are worried. Publishers are in favor of open access. They think that public-funded research should be open, but they're concerned about, the revenues, the outcomes. So, they have sort of mixed, feelings. And also, we got the impression that some of them have not a clear idea what open access is. Self-archiving is allowed. It's very liberal policy. Self-archiving is allowed, upon acceptance of publication or immediately after publication. In some cases, there are embargo. Peer reviewing is performed, almost everywhere. This is pretty interesting because in the past, at least in Italy, it was not very common. And the other interesting thing is that in some countries still, authors do not sign any contract, so there is no copyright, basically deposition, policy. So basically, those countries have a very low publishers, which are registered in Sherpa Romeo. When, a contract is signed, usually, an exclusive transfer of copyright is requested. In some other cases, not an exclusive. So there are few publishers which use, Creative Commons license because they are not open access publishers. It's interesting to see the good effect which had in Sherpa Romeo, the project which were carried out in Portugal, Blimunda and Dulcinea in Spain, and now also in Eloise in France. So these are publishers, these are projects where were collected, all the copyright and policy from publishers, and then they were, exported, to Sherpa Romeo. And now I wanted to summarize what we learned from that. That definitely the institution, what Minho did, was a very good example that, we wish, some other countries could have, mandate as Minho did, and the positive effect which had, throughout, Portugal. That definitely to have, a centrally funded project, which is the case of Recollect and Recap, that's another important thing, because it'll accelerate, the process. And definitely with research funders, this is also Victoria mentioned, I think we have to engage, more with policy makers at any level, especially with research funders. Definitely it would be easier at institutional level because we already have an infrastructure there. And then the actions required, this is the case of Spain. We had this discussion yesterday. Spain is the only country which has a science and technological law, which includes an article, this Article 37, which has a mandate. Actually, even Greece is discussing having a law, but we realize that having a law is not enough. That then there's a lot of work which has to do afterwards, which means engagement and awareness, raising with all the stakeholders. And also, we should pay more attention also to research data, and I think we can work closely with the Open Air Plus, project in our countries. Probably we could even start working on national research data infrastructure in our countries, because none of these Southern European countries has a research data infrastructure. Then about the tracker. The tracker, as the word says, wants to track, the open access activities in the 6 countries. We did it after, the survey, so we had the results, the survey, which helped us to design, the tracker. We wanted to observe, the growth of open access in all these 7 countries, but also we wanted to use it as an advocacy, tool. So we wanted, to highlight, what was going on with reference to journals, policy, publishers, institutional policy. We want also to compare trends in these countries, and we wanted to promote, data with facts and figures. We have not developed it yet. This last part, which Casper now CINECA will develop. We want also to export, data in probably in Excel format, so we can be reused, in different, contexts. And this is also replying what Alma was saying yesterday, that we were trying, I mean, the reason why we developed this tracker was also because we wanted to implement, I mean, populate, you know, the international directories like RoarMap and Open Door with, I mean, information from Southern Europe. And we're already doing that. You know, there are some institutions from the South which use the tracker and they didn't find their institutions, and we said them, if you don't deposit information on RoarMap, we can't have the information here. So I think in this respect, I mean, it's helping. How it works. The data ingestion comes, I mean, from those authoritative sources like DOJ, Sherpa Romeo, Sherpa Juliet, Open Door, RoarMap. We're also thinking of developing a tool, I mean, to ingest, part of the software, to ingest also from national authoritative sources like, I mean, Recollecta in Spain and Recap. When the data are ingested, I mean, through API when available, or some script, I mean, programs were written. And once they've ingested, I mean, we had to do some data cleaning because, I mean, there are some duplication of data. So there is, I mean, some work which should be done on the authoritative sources to become more authoritative. We also allow, I mean, browse and search functionalities to allow discovery, I mean, of information. Also, we wanted to have a graphic visualization because we were thinking that probably even the policy makers, if they have a graphic, I mean, visualization, have an idea of what, I mean, they should be doing. And we also developed a suggestion form, so from any Southern European countries, any person, I mean, can recommend new sources which we can ingest. And then we would like, I mean, in the end, to export, I mean, this information, even, I mean, to the international, I mean, repositories, but this is it's not been developed yet, but I think we will do pretty soon. And this is, I mean, just, I mean, a quick tour of the, you know, of it, so you can search it. I mean, you can search it by country, you can search it by funder policies, institutional policy, or journal, from copyright, I mean, policies. This is giving you an idea. If you choose, I mean, the publisher's copyright policy and choose a country, you can have it from Portugal, and you can have, I mean, all the information is basically taken, in this case, I mean, from Sherpa Romeo. And then you can combine also, I mean, years with institutions to have, I mean, information. And also you have, I mean, this graphic, I mean, which also Victoria showed, I mean, before, to have an idea which are the open access journals, which growth, I mean, in all countries in this case, or just by single country. And also you have, from the open access repository, you have an idea what kind of content is deposited, I mean, by subject area and by country. And also we have a private area where, I mean, information can be put, I mean, by the partners. And you also can add some information about institutional policies if they're not available in the international repository, and that's it.
Thank you, Paola. Does anybody have a question for Paola?